Take a moment right here, feeling like it's out gear. Running, running, no. Keep running.
Today, we're going to discuss a nice and neat theory. So, this theory that I cooked up was introduced when we got introduced to TOKI. All right. So, in this chapter, the most important event I would say in this chapter is that TOKI said that she was born almost 800 years ago. And now she's 26 years old. With her time fruit, she's been hopping through time. She cannot move back, but she can move forward through time. Now, TOKI said that she was born 800 years ago, right? 30 years ago, she said that. So, approximately, TOKI is 130 years old. Dog, 830 years ago, 800 to be exact, was the end of the void century. 830 years ago was during the void century. So, you see where my theory is going, right? We have someone in a One Piece verse live during the void century in this flashback. That is big news. Big news. So let's get to the main fact about TOKI that might legitimize my theory about this One Piece void century. So TOKI said that she was born 800 years ago, but she's 26. Mind you, we're in a flashback that's 30 years old. So to be exact, TOKI is 830 years old, right? The void century started 900 years ago, right? It ended 800 years ago, 100-year war. So if TOKI is 830 years old, that means she was alive during the void century, which means that she was alive 70 years after the start of the void century and 30 years until it ended. What makes her like what, 70% inside the void century? Anyways, she knows about the void century. Now we don't know how often she time jump, right? So we don't know if she been time jumping for a year or maybe two until she was like the 24, right? So she could been time jump for 2 years straight. We don't know what she got devil fruit. So evidently she knows somewhat of the void century. She knows a lot. Basically the war and who really was on which side or who versus who. Now, if you don't know about the void century, I'm pretty sure you do because you clicked on my video. Let's do a small little recap, not too much. Now, the void century was introduced 22 years ago on a West Blue island called Ohio. Basically, this island was riddled with archaeologists studying the history of the world. And they were studying the poneglyphs. If you didn't know by now, after the void century, the 12 nations, aka the new government, banned it reading the poneglyphs. Anything about the poneglyphs, say anything about the poneglyphs, the government banned it. So ultimately it was outlawed. So within those 22 years, the people of Ohara went on an expedition to read and find the poneglyphs. Mind you, one of these people in the expedition was Nico Robin's mother, Alvin. Now, Alvin was the last survivor of the expedition, but she got caught by the Marines who befriended Sal, and Sal let her out, and she came exactly to Ohara. Now, the government followed her all the way back to Ohara because they speculated that these people in Ohara was reading the poneglyphs, which was outlawed. Basically, to cut it short, everybody got massacred on the island. There was a buster call. There was two vice admirals. The vice admiral then Akainu and Okiji. So Akainu killed even the people that tried to get away. You know, people who was innocent and not reading the poneglyphs. You know, that was the saddest part about this. And the only survivor, as we know, was Nico Robin. So, like I said, to get more details on that, you should really look at YouTube because I'm going on a small count of people that, you know, trying to get their brain refreshed. But let's get into the juicy theory about the void century during the void century, right? That's what we really want. So, before we can get into the void century, we have to know what happened before the 4th century, exactly 900 years ago. Specifically, we're going to talk about the kingdoms that was built before the 4th century and still flourished after the 4th century. And at the same time, we're going to talk about the kingdoms that was before the 4th century also, but it got eradicated and destroyed after the 4th century. Because that's going to give us more details of what was really going on and whose side who's on. So the first kingdom we're going to talk about is Shandaria, built 1100 years ago and flourished, but fell after the 4th century to the 20 kingdoms, which is now known as the world government. So Chandala is an ancient city that resided on Jiraiya, but was later blasted up to the upper yard by the Naka stream. So we seen that this was once the city of gold until Enel took all the gold to use on its ark. This is one of the cities got totally obliterated after the 4th century. So mind you, they probably were aligned with the 20 nations when the war happened. They wanted nothing to do with the 20 nations during this time. So this kingdom, Shandaria, was on alongside another kingdom. Faithfully, this kingdom was ultimately destroyed. But now let's talk about Alabasta. Now, Alabasta Kingdom is a country that's been existing since 500 years before the 4th century, maybe even longer, stated by Robin. The capital of Alabasta, Alabama, has existed for more than 4,000 years. But the difference between Alabasta and Shandaria is that Alabasta hid the poneglyph for centuries from the outside world. And the two main differences about these two kingdoms is Shandaria, who really fought to protect their poneglyphs, was utterly destroyed by the 20 nations, aka the government. But Alabasta, who has a poneglyph, hid their poneglyph from the outside world that wasn't destroyed by the government for a reason. But they also have a poneglyph. That doesn't make sense. So why was Alabasta so favored in this war, this 100-year war during the 4th century? What did Alabasta had going on, right? Because they also had a poneglyph. If they were so pro new government of the 20 kingdoms, why was they even had a poneglyph in their hands? I mean, if the poneglyphs are so taboo and outlawed, why is Alabasta still here? Because they did have a poneglyph. It doesn't make sense to me. Well, you can say that Alabasta, hid their poneglyph from the 20 nations pretty good. But why? But why Alabasta wasn't wiped out by the government? Why was there so much favoritism towards Alabasta from the 20 nations? Even though they had a poneglyph, which was ultimately banned by the government, if Alabasta was so pro-new generation to the new 20 nations, why do they have a poneglyph? It doesn't make sense. So before I give you too much information on Alabasta and what they had got going on, let's talk about Wano, because Wano also was a country where it was built way before the 4th century and still flourishes after the 4th century. I mean, it's bad because Kaido took over it, but still, it's still here after the 4th century. So Wano is one of those big countries that's isolated. It's surprisingly a highly advanced country. They have plenty of things going on. They're people that created the sea stone handcuffs. In fact, there are the people who invented the indestructible poneglyphs. But also, just like Alabasta, this kingdom wasn't wiped out by the government. Well, you could say because the Wano country has been exiled from the outside world for years. It's not confirmed how long, Wano was exiled or has been exiled, but we do know it's hard to get inside Wano. Well, you got Gekomoru who infiltrated twice, but at the same time, the Marines don't know the power level of the people in Wano. So it's a mysterious thing around Wano from the outside world. But the next kingdom we're going to talk about, lastly, but not least, is the Great Kingdom, the Great Civilization Kingdom. Now, we do know this kingdom flourished and ruled on all four corners of the world. It was enormous, they say. They say it was very powerful and very advanced, as in technology advanced. But just like its other counterparts, was ultimately wiped out by the 20 nations, aka the government. So many people theorize how this country got wiped out just like that. So basically, it mysteriously got wiped out. Like the history of the civilization, everything completely gone throughout the records books in One Piece verse. But what's crazy about this is that this country mysteriously just up and vanished almost. So it's like not just a civilization, but the history, their way of culture, you know, everything was erased from the history. You know, to know about this culture, to know about this civilization, you have to read the poneglyphs. But ultimately, it got outlawed, banned from the world government after the Void Century, just because of this history of this great kingdom. It was ultimately banned from reading the poneglyphs. And at the same time, thinking, how can an overpowered kingdom like that just get wiped out of history? There had to be some motive. It had to be something big to wipe so many people out just like that. Ultimately, the Void Century ended with this kingdom being destroyed. So that gives me a thought, like, what was the reasons, right? Throughout this 100-year war, the Void Century actually, what ultimately ended with the destruction of the Great Kingdom, was they such a threat to the rest of the world that these 20 jealous nations demanded every country to stand up with them to destroy this country or suffer the consequences? Because at the same time, you know, these 20 nations went on a war for 100 years just to destroy this one kingdom. And we do see that some of the kingdoms probably allied with the Great Kingdom, because some of them are not here today, right? They got destroyed after the Void Century, just like Shandara. Shandara was probably aligned with the Great Kingdom. That's why it ultimately got destroyed. I'm thinking that this Great Kingdom probably has the D lineage. You know, the initial D, like Monkey D. Luffy. The D lineage was probably born here at the Great Kingdom, because just like, you know, the Great Kingdom, the initial D is also taboo. So there got to be something linking between the two. We all know that poneglyphs was made after the Void Century to keep the great civilization history alive. But why is Alabasta Kingdom and Wano Country still flourishing? But the most important thing, why is Alabasta part of the 20 nations with the poneglyph? You know, was Alabasta secretly allied with the great nation, the great civilization, during the 100-year war, the Void Century, but also allied with the 20 nations? It's one thing to be secretly aligned, you know, with the great civilization, but openly aligned with the 20 nations. Alabasta plays a great role in this Void Century. To me, it doesn't make sense to have a poneglyph and still be allied with the 20 nations, even though the poneglyphs are banned by the 20 nations. To see what's better going on with the Nefertiti family, we have to go in Alabasta during this arc. So Robin had a brief but important conversation with Nefertiti, Cobra. In this conversation between Cobra and Robin, Cobra stated that he has a hereditary charge of the monarchs to protect the poneglyphs. Robin implied by laughing and stated at which she implied he wasn't aware of the reasons why the people before him decided to conceal his country's poneglyphs. This happened way before Cobra's time. Now, in this conversation, Robin stated that he doesn't know the difference between concealment and protecting. Mind you, Robin read the poneglyph in Alabasta. So with Cobra not understanding it, he don't really know what the poneglyph is saying. So basically, I'm trying to say that this happened way before Cobra time, that the people of Alabasta, the Nefertiti family, and the people that came before Nefertiti was concealing the poneglyph. Not protecting it, but concealing it from the world government. I know that the 20 nations truly trusted the Alabasta Kingdom when the 20 nations, aka the government, gave Pluton to Alabasta, really to secretly hide it. Now, that's ultimate trust, right or wrong. So that's still the deal between Alabasta and the 20 nations, right? If the 20 nations is going to give Pluton for you guys can hold, they ultimately trust them. And I'm thinking, more importantly, Alabasta swore to never speak of the Void Century again with their alliance, because Alabasta people don't even know about the Void Century. Now, Alabasta being a kingdom, like I said, way before the Void Century, 500 years before the Void Century. So this alliance had to be strong. But at the same time, Alabasta still has the poneglyphs and hiding it from the world government, which doesn't make sense whatsoever. So this alliance came about, right? Then the alliance was sworn to never say nothing about the void century. Same, probably the same thing like Wano. Wano swore to not say anything about the void century, and they promised to be exiled for the rest of their years. More importantly, if that's the fact, that means that the government did not know Wano was actually the people who made the poneglyphs. Of course, the allied nations that was allied with the Great Kingdom were scared once the Great Kingdom got taken down. Remind you, the Great Kingdom led all 4 corners of the world. So once the 20 nations took down the Great Kingdom, the allied nations thought it wasn't even possible. So mind you, after that, the people were scared. People were scared of the 20 nations doing impossible tasks of taking down the Great Kingdom. So I think Wano was one of these countries that was scared after the 20 nations took down the Great Kingdom. So that's why I think Wano bend the knee to the 20 nations. Yeah, little Game of Thrones. But I think Wano bend the knee to the 20 nations and sworn an oath to be isolated for years to come. And that's why I think Wano is so isolated. Because once the 20 nations beat the Great Kingdom, Wano didn't want to get destroyed or wiped out of history like they did the Great Kingdom. So in order for, Wano to make 20 nations trust them, they had to bend the knee and be isolated for the whole centuries to come, and not speak of the void century. It makes perfect sense. It maybe took a few decades for Wano to prove to the 20 nations that they would remain isolated, but they did it. So that means that, 20 nations somewhat trust Wano. Plus, they hadn't speak nothing of the void century. But, Wano secretly was building the poneglyphs. So that means that they would secretly continue their little rebellion against the 20 nations. Let's talk about something important alongside the void century. And that's the ancient weapons. Because the ancient weapons play a big part in my theory. Ultimately, I think these ancient weapons destroyed single-handedly the great civilization. Because even though the void century, the poneglyphs are outlawed, many people still know about the ancient weapons more than the void century itself. For example, during the time skip, 2 major arcs were centered around one ancient weapon, Pluton. Now, in Alabasta, Sir Crocodile was searching for Pluton for his own gains. But in Water 7, Pluton blueprints was introduced, which made the government come in Water 7, specifically the CP9 agents, and investigate this claim that might just destroy the world. See, my theory is that the 20 nations, known as the government now, created these ancient weapons to battle against the Great Kingdom and its allies. The Great Kingdom is said to rule all 4 corners. So with the ancient weapons, the 20 nations would stand a chance. My theory goes to even bigger detail. So what if on 100 year of the void century war, the last year of the void century, the government unleashed all the ancient weapons on the great civilization, killing millions, completely genocide, a complete eradication of the whole nation within 100 years, a cruel, unforgiving event people would try to cover up. Similar to D-Day, right? So was most other survivors, did they dub middle initial D to never forget? It makes perfect sense. The reason why the D initial is in people's names is also to never forget. Most people cannot read, nobody can read the poneglyphs aside from Robin. I would say 3 other people maybe that Oda didn't clarify yet. But the 3 other people said they can hear the voice of all things, maybe can read the poneglyphs. For people who can't read the poneglyphs, what if the great civilizations, the refugees who survived that grateful event 800 years ago, the end of the void century, dubbed their initial D for Doomsday? That will make perfect sense, right? For they can live on. For people can realize that middle initial D stands for Doomsday, stands for the history of the great civilization, the great kingdom. Because, like I said, most people cannot read the poneglyphs. 0.02 is a percentage of people on One Piece that can read the poneglyphs. How can you discover anything if you can't read it? So, an alternative would be the initial D. I know what you're thinking, where does Toki come in this theory? Now, Toki plays a central role in my theory. Toki is from the Void Century, right? Toki wants to go to Wano. Why would a woman from the Void Century would want to go to Wano? Maybe it's there where the survivors of the Great Kingdom reside, where they seek refuge from the Great Kingdom. There has to be survivors, right, from the Great Kingdom. Everybody just can get wiped out like that, right or wrong. It's a big and massive kingdom. And plus, if it's a war, people are fighting in different areas, right or wrong. So people are going around the country fighting the opposite side. So there has to be survivors of the great civilization, right? What's more safer than seeking refuge on an isolated country like Wano? Nobody goes in, nobody goes out. How does the government know that you're there if it's so isolated, right or wrong? Then, this is where the poneglyphs was made, in Wano, right or wrong. So, the refugees had to seek Wano out because that's the most safest place to be, an isolated country. If Toki was born 830 years ago, right? The Wano country would be the perfect place to call home, right? It's the closest place to call home. Where is Toki family? Toki ancestors probably are here in Wano. Toki does have the time fruit, right? Where she can only go forward. She can't go back. What if she is trying to find her ancestors because she know that they will be on Wano? Because in fact, the people of Wano consist of the people that once lived on the Great Kingdom. It makes perfect sense because Wano is a perfect place to hide in plain sight from the government. This theory makes perfect sense if you just read between the lines. Why would a girl far from home go to Wano, right? If you're a person that's mysteriously in an unknown place, where will you find refuge? A place where you should call home. Basically, she was born in the Void Century, so she know what carries on and what's going on. Plus, we don't know how many time hops she did hop in. But at the same time, we can say that I'm pretty sure she was a mature adult when she got her devil fruit. I know she's not like Luffy going around adventurer, trying to cut herself and be known by a Yonko. So this theory makes perfect sense to me. Like I said, theories always get debunked sometimes, but I think I hit gold this time with this one right here. So leave me some feedback in the comment section what you think about this theory. What's most you like about this theory? Because I like it. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video. Comment down like I said before. Subscribe to the channel to get more content of me and more content of One Piece. My Hero Academia is coming up next, and I swear you would not be disappointed. Also, look out for my Face Off series coming soon. You're going to be shocked. The world going to love that Face Off series. But like always, stay safe out there.